Hi, everybody. So as she said, I'm Jason Reid. I'm a senior NFL writer with ESPN and Anscape. I primarily write about race in the NFL, and I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. And right here to my left, your right, we have Running While Black, Alison Mariella Désir.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I am first and foremost a mother to a 3.5-year-old. I'm an author, an activist, a community builder, and excited to be in conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, let's hop to it. So I tell you what, I've had a chance to get through most of the books. And one of the things I think is really interesting that I want to start our conversation with around this intersection of race and sports is the themes in both of your books that there was an archetype for the black quarterback and for a runner. And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit, and I'm going to come to you first, Alison, a little bit about that and kind of how you get into that in your book, and then Jason, you next.
Yeah, absolutely. So many folks, when they think about long distance running, they think about thin, white men and women. And if you know anything about the origin story that's typically told is that in Eugene, Oregon in 1963, Coach Bill Bowerman put a call out and invited people to join him at Hayward Field. So, several thousand people joined him that first time. And I remember, as I was writing this book, I looked at that origin story and I thought to myself, okay, well, there's this clear divide in who participates in running. The sprints and the jumps are black folks. Long distance running are white folks. So I started to think about that origin story, looked at photos, recognized that in 1963, when those thousands of people joined Bill Bowerman, they were all white people. And I started to ask myself, well, what were the black people doing, right? I started to think about, 1963, you're thinking about the civil rights movement, the fact that black people can't enter the front door, don't have equal access to education, don't have the freedom of movement to move through space. And that really set me on this journey of wanting to contextualize running, the history of running, and really get to the bottom of why is it that there are not a lot of us black people in long distance running, and what can be done to further expand the sport for us.
Along those same lines, in terms of quarterbacks, there was basically a quarterback that fit the model. And all those quarterbacks were white. They were all 6'3", around there. And for most of the NFL's history, most of pro football history, college football history, black men were not permitted to play quarterback because they were just not considered smart enough. They were not considered to be leaders. And this really continued all the way up until the early 1970s, where we started to see slow change. But there was definitely a model, and the NFL was not interested in breaking that model.
Yeah. Now what I'll say was what was interesting, as I was reading a little bit about your book, there was the conversation about polo. And him being a key person that started the whole NFL, that really was a key figure in moving it forward. So even though you said not until the 1970s that, they started to consider now, maybe a black quarterback, in history, a black quarterback was the person that actually helped to get the league started. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Fritz Pollard was the first black NFL star, and he was the first black NFL coach, and he was also the first black quarterback. Now, he played quarterback in a way where you wouldn't recognize it. This was in the early 1920s, but he was the first black quarterback, and as such, he set a standard for excellence in terms of being a great player and a great quarterback. But again, the league did not want this. Even in its infancy, the league did not want this, and he was largely lost to history for a very long time. And as we look at the superstar black quarterbacks of today, Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, is the first year that two black quarterbacks started in the Super Bowl, and they all stand on his shoulders. And you have to have the first one to have others. And although like I said, he was largely lost to history, he is the first one, and he's the one we point to saying that's when it all started.
Yeah, very good. Now, there was a point in the book for you, Alison, where you started to talk a little bit about, you did an origin piece where you talked about how uncomfortable you were when you kind of started getting into the running and showing up and not having representation. And you talked about trying to confront what white supremacy was and how that impacted your self-esteem and who you were as a young person. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that transition of moving to teen and now trying to create space when there was no space for someone that looked like you there?
Yeah, I also did want to comment about, you mentioned somebody being lost to history, and similarly in my book I talk about Ted Corbett, who is the father of long distance running, who was a member of the New York Pioneer Club, which was actually the first integrated sports team in the 1930s. And the way that Ted Corbett, for most runners, if you ask them who was the father of long distance running or who some of the heroes are, his name does not come up, right? Yeah. So this similarity in the way that, in my book, the chapter is called We Were There, right? Like we, in most instances, black people, we've always been there. We are foundational to this country. I was just in Nicole Hannah-Jones talking about the 1619 Project. So we've been foundational in nearly every aspect of culture, society, but our names have been lost, hidden, obscured. But to your point, a big part of my personal journey was recognizing the way that I too was consuming white supremacy and that it impacted what I thought about myself, everything from feeling like I was ugly for most of my life to thinking that I was stupid, to feeling like I wasn't good enough, and then finally getting my second master's at Columbia University. So I was a grown person. Casual flex. But no, just to say that it took that long for me to get to a point where I realized, wow, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just that I'm ingesting all of these images, all of these ideas about what beauty is, about what smart is, about what successful is, and none of those things center me. So I started to push back and recognize that while yes, white supremacy exists in books and in history, it also exists in the air. Like we are all consuming that at all times, and it's the work of decolonizing your mind is continues to be a daily practice.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that? You know, it's so true what you just said about the images that we see, and you know, representation matters.
Yep.
Because if you don't see anyone who looks like you do have this belief that you know the European idea of beauty is the only idea of beauty. That if you are a young black man who aspires to play quarterback in the 1960s, 1970s, all you saw were white men at that position. So it only tends to be something that would be in your mind that, well, I can't aspire to do that because that pathway is not there for me. So when we talk about representation and we talk about people being in positions to show us, not even tell us, but show us that, hey, I am beautiful and that I can accomplish things. And the reason I believe that is because I see people who look like me doing it. You know, I have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter, and you know, in terms of things that I talk to them about things that they can accomplish, I'm so happy that, you know, their generation does not see limitations. Because for them, you know, seeing not just superstars in sports, but I mean, you know, there was a black president, you know, when they were, you know, coming up. So basically, there are pathways to accomplish whatever we want to accomplish. There are pathways for us seeing ourselves and the beauty that we have inner and outer. But again, there's got to be representation. So when you see that representation, it provides the belief that this can be accomplished.
Yeah, very, 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 very true. And along the lines, one of the things that I thought was really critical when you started addressing kind of this idea about white supremacy was really defining what that was. There was a moment at some point you're having a conversation, you're on a panel with a group of people or something, and the person's like, I'm not a Nazi, I'm not, you know, this extreme version of it. I'd like for us to kind of talk about, okay, not the extreme, but what are the examples that really say it, that aren't extreme, to help people understand, because I believe that's what both of the books are saying or trying to do, and really show, well, it's not just this extreme thing. It's as simple as you know, images, as you already stated, as one thing. But can you talk a little bit more about that context and defining that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when many people hear white supremacy, what they hear is the KKK or they hear cross burnings. And said simply, white supremacy is as seeing whiteness as the supreme, as the center, right? And this manifests in many ways, everything from for a long time when you got Band-Aids, Band-Aids were only one color, and it was a color that matched white people's skin. Nude stockings, right? Nude, because the default was white people's skin. When you think about what's taught in education and all of the resistance that we're experiencing now in education about not putting things in the curriculum that could possibly make white people feel guilt when they are in fact true history, right? It is because the world centers whiteness, sees it as the default, sees it as the framework, and then the rest of us are divergent from that, right? So that's really what we're talking about. And when I say it in that way, it allows people to recognize also that white supremacy and racism are not a matter of good people and bad people. I often joke, I know a lot of really good people who are racist, right? Because it is a matter of whether you're participating in a system that prioritizes a certain person over another person. Whether you're participating, and we are all participating because we're all in society, right? In a society that upholds certain characteristics or people over others. And that sort of, for me, allows me to have deeper conversations with people so that they can understand how they might be upholding those systems or participating. And it's less, because nobody wants to be a bad person, right? No. Nobody wants to think, like the first thing you say when somebody says, oh, but I'm not racist, like I have a black friend and in my heart, and it really has nothing to do with what's in your heart, who your friends are, right? It's a matter of these larger systems at play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have, I don't even know what I can add to that. I mean, because you said that so well, and yeah. If there's anything I can add, it really comes down to the concept of privilege a lot of times. Yep. Like, I'm not someone who sees racism in every instance, but when racism exists,
it is what it is.
It is what it is, and in terms of like when I was working on this book, like I cover race in the NFL. That's my job. So when I set out to start researching this book, I wanted to be very fair about the situations that I was trying to explain in the book about how these things came to be. And I've gotten into it with Twitter. I don't do this. I don't do this anymore. But I don't do it anymore. But I used to get into it with Twitter because people would say, well, why does this stuff matter? Well, why do we have to keep talking about this? Slavery was so long ago. Yeah. Why do we have to talk about these things? And Jim Crow laws were not, relatively speaking, that long ago. No. The practice of redlining, does everyone know what redlining is? Okay, well, just real briefly, redlining is basically, I'm going to really boil this down, when black people weren't allowed to live in certain neighborhoods. And, the pathway to generational wealth in this country for most people is owning a home, you pay off the home, and you leave it to your kids, and the home appreciates, and you make a lot of money. Correct. Well, if you are excluded from participating in that venture, and if you're not allowed to do that, well, that's going to have an effect. So it's very easy for people who have never been excluded to say, well, why do we have to continue to talk about these things? Right. And I go to the point of that I was trying to make earlier about the two black quarterbacks starting in the Super Bowl for the first time. Yep. The reason that was so significant was not just anytime there's a milestone, anytime there's a first, it's significant. Correct. But they just weren't two black quarterbacks. They were the two players who finished first and the second in the MVP voting. They were the two players who were the top two ranked quarterbacks in the NFL. They led the teams with the best records. And in talking to pioneers, what they always told me is we knew eventually we would be the best at the position. All it was a matter of opportunity. So when you are excluded from opportunity, from participating, and essentially what the American dream is, you want to know when that's going to be allowed to happen. Not when you're going to be handed something, but when you're going to get an opportunity to compete on your merits, on your intellect. And that's really what we're talking about here. Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is interesting, and so right now you have Lamar Jackson in the book, so you talk a little bit about him because he's a superstar. But right now, I mean, they've decided not to put the franchise tag on him, and everybody's like looking at his stats, and they're like, he's clearly one of the top players. Can you talk a little bit about what the systemic racism looks like with a person who has a clear record that they've gotten it done, but right now, I mean, people are opting out.
Yeah. Yeah. The Lamar Jackson situation is such an interesting one because, in many ways, he represented all the things black quarterbacks had to go through in the past. That when he went into the NFL draft, there were questions about, could he really be a quarterback? Even in spite of the fact that he won a Heisman Trophy at Louisville when he was in college, there were all these questions about, well, could he really do this? And then he wins an MVP award. He is a flat-out superstar. Yep. Now, there are a lot of teams that you think would want to bid on him, and they're not doing it now. And there's a lot of factors that are involved with that. But at the end of the day, when you talk about black players or black superstars at that position, and Patrick Mahomes, I'm bouncing around a little bit here, I'm sorry, but Patrick Mahomes talked about him and Lamar Jackson earlier before the season began because they were criticized anonymously by coaches in the league. And what Patrick Mahomes said is the criticism about us, me and Lamar, doesn't look like the criticism about people who don't look like us who play the position. And I really think what it comes down to is, look, I don't know if racism is ever going to be eradicated. And I'm not saying that everything involving Lamar Jackson has to do with racism, but there are still beliefs that people hold on to. They don't want to say it publicly because you can get eliminated if you say that stuff publicly now, but they will say it anonymously, and that just goes to show you that there's still that there.
Yeah, and says it's a system, as we talk about it, it's systemic, it's thoughts, and so we might not be able to eradicate it, but the awareness is what helps us figure it out. And so one of the things that I think is very interesting in sports, so I don't think I told y'all what I do. I'm the commissioner of the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference. I played basketball, ran track, graduated from University of New Orleans. So I've been an athlete all my life. And I will often say to people that sports is a microcosm of society. Everything that I learned about sports. I was asked a panel question. They said, what is it that you love so much about sports? And I said, it unites people. That's what I said. But then I started reading y'all's books. It unites us. We all come together. We're all striving for one goal. But then I read the book. And I'm reading the book about these instances of black athletes who were on teams, but, they couldn't stay in a hotel. There were teams who wouldn't play them. And or wouldn't compete. I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I was like, well, sports was supposed to be the thing that brings us together, but maybe not so.
Yeah, there's also something that you said earlier when you were talking about redlining, and I talk a lot about redlining in my book. There's this chapter called Everything is Connected. And for people who say, well, these things happened such a long time ago, I actually, in the book, I did just a mini study where I used Strava heat map data. So Strava is this app that tracks your movement, running, walking, hiking, lots of different activities. And I overlaid the heat, so where people were moving a lot, with red line maps. And what you find is that the neighborhoods that were redlined, neighborhoods that literally had a red line around them where blacks, Jews, Japanese people were forced to live, right, corresponds directly with where people move. So areas that were marked A or green, right, where lots of white people live, there's lots of movement. People are running, walking, hiking. Places that were historically redlined, people are not moving, right? Because there's a connection between your built environment, whether the streets are safe, whether there's lighting, whether there's access to green spaces, and who gets outdoors, right? So these things that were so long ago absolutely define today. And to your point about unity, right? Lots of people ask me that question, and what I say is, one, I don't seek to be united with people who want to do harm to me, right? So this question of unity is not really one that I spend too much time thinking about, but also that unity in that sports is a microcosm for society, that all of the factors that play, racism, transphobia, sexism, all of the factors that are at play in society are also at play within sport, right? Women make far less than men in the same basketball, right? I mean, the fact that Brittany Griner had to be in Russia was because of the gender pay gap, right?
Correct.
So I think the way that we talk about sport is really aspirational. There are a lot of beautiful things. Sport saved my life, transformed my life. I wouldn't have my family without it. But we need to be realistic about the ways that the structural, systemic issues that play out in life do not disappear when you get on the court or when you get on the field. In fact, in many ways, they're amplified and give us an opportunity to really analyze them.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, and then I'll.
Well, I totally 1,000% agree with that. And, we saw that play out with the Colin Kaepernick situation.
Yeah.
And that situation, polling shows us, largely broke down along racial lines.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, most black people were supportive or okay with it, and generally speaking, most white people were not.
Yeah.
And again, generally speaking, according to polling. Now, I also saw this play out in the media. Within sports media, there were many white reporters who were opposed to what he did and spoke about it and wrote columns about it. And there were many black reporters like, well, you don't see what we see.
Yeah.
Everything is shaped from your life experience.
Yeah.
And I think generally speaking, most good people all want the same things. They want to be safe, they want to have good lives, they want their children to have better lives than they did. But there are issues that do separate us. And the reality of it is that when most of these issues revolve around race, some of them revolve around sex, and things, but most of them revolve around race. And we saw that with the Colin Kaepernick situation.
Yeah, and I'll say this. So as you were speaking a little bit about the redlining, and then talking about your study that you did, where you started to look at who was moving and what was happening, when you systemically then start looking at diseases within communities. So in the black community, they lead to diabetes, high blood pressure, and all of those things are connected to exercise.
And what unfortunately what we do a lot in this country is that we blame the person for their circumstances, right? So we say that it's as if black people, we don't want to take care of ourselves, and if only we went out for a run more or did this, right? Without recognizing that many black people in this country live in food deserts, live in formerly redlined neighborhoods, don't have access to food, right? So it is not so much that the individual has decided that they want to have poor health outcomes. It is that there is this whole network of forces that have an impact on you. Like, I don't want to say that personal responsibility does not matter, because of course each of us can make personal decisions, but we do have to think about, if you're a person living in poverty, maybe you yourself are an immigrant, and maybe you're trans, right? You think about all of the layers of, or the intersections of your identity, and then you tell that person, well, if only you just went running, you would have better health, right? It's unfair. We don't have the same starting line. And that's what equity is. Equality is we all get the same. Equity is that we give the person, people who need more,
you give more.
Get more. And if you don't need more, you don't get more, right?
Yeah. Again, 1,000%. And if I didn't agree, I'd say that. But I was, you touched on the food deserts. It's when you look at issues like diabetes and hypertension in the black community, and people say, well, their diet should be better. Well, if you live in a food desert, the Buffalo situation, where Buffalo shooter walked into the supermarket, well, when that supermarket closed down, and I don't remember specifically the mileage radius, but there wasn't a supermarket in a very wide distance from that supermarket. So, well, what are those people supposed to do? And it's very easy to say everyone should pick themselves up by their bootstraps and just, push ahead and persevere. Well, okay, fine. And I do believe in personal responsibility, too. I think that definitely has its place. But if you get a 100-yard head start on me, and then you let me run, and I'm 70 yards behind you still, well, is that because I haven't taken personal responsibility and tried to do more, or is that to a degree I have to deal with my circumstances?
Yeah, very good, very good. So one of the things, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, you started talking a little bit about kind of what's happening across the country, banning books and things like that. And so, I didn't know about cross country. Like, when I read your book, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I had no idea. I thought only white people ran cross country. That's why I ran track. I'm sorry. I hate to say that. I was just over. I was like, oh no, we don't run long distances. So I'm being very honest.
It's white people shit.
Like,
we say colloquially.
I got to run 5 miles. Oh no, I don't have to stand. I'm gonna do my sprint. So I remember I ran cross country to get in shape, because I knew that would help me for basketball. And I eventually opted for track. And then as I, again, continued to think about this, I was like, well, I would have never known that if you hadn't put that in your book. Same thing with Fritz and him being the beginning of the NFL Hall of Fame. I was like, who is this guy? And maybe I'm supposed to know because I've been in sports. But I did not know. And so as we think about each of you in your role, you talked a little bit earlier about not wanting to be the spokesperson for Black person, but then found your purpose. And you're kind of doing that work. You're media. So you're chronicling. You are writing the history. Can you talk to us about how important for each of you those roles are now as we're working towards a better community and a better world?
Yeah, I think that what I recognize the older that I get is, well, in writing my book, I realized that young Alison I could not be here without young Alison, right? And that I was making trouble, but I was making good trouble. I was the person who was defending my classmates and speaking out. And thankfully, my parents really nurtured that side of me on top of sharing actual history at home, recognizing that in school I would not be learning a fabricated version of events, right? So I think that what I recognize about myself is that I feel like it's almost my destiny to do this work. Right. I also have a ton of privilege, right? I am in a smaller body. I'm somebody who people find as attractive, which I recognize makes a huge impact on a lot of the opportunities that I get. I speak the way I speak. I have a lot of education. And so, as Liam Neeson would say, I have this particular set of skills. Hey. And I also love history. And so I find that, it's really what gives me life is to be in these conversations, to have uncomfortable conversations to the point where sometimes people say, wow, that was so uncomfortable. I have no even measure of what is uncomfortable because I try to be as bold and as outspoken as possible to use my privilege in the service of others and in the service of equity. I don't want to take things from other people. I just want us to have access to the same things.
Absolutely.
And when you have privilege, I said this in a different panel, when you have privilege and other people get that privilege, it often feels like, oh my gosh, now I'm losing something. And you're not. It's just expanding that circle. So that is what I see my life's journey is about.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, I mean, and that's the thing that so many people who are so frightened about the change in the country, that's what they feel, that, well, if you're gaining more, well, it takes everything away from me. But it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It doesn't. And as for my story, as you pointed out, I'm a journalist. I'm actually chronicling what happens, and I've been a journalist my whole career. And I remember when I started out, people would say, "Well, journalists they have to be objective." Well, that's not true, because everybody, even if it's subconsciously, everybody brings their life experiences to what they do. And for me, I write my opinion now. I mean, I'm an opinionist. I'm a columnist, and I give my opinion that has been shaped upon my life experience as a Black man in this country, as first a Black boy and then a Black man, and a father of Black children and a Black son who I had to have a conversation with him at 12 years old about how to keep himself alive in certain situations. And, so all those things shape us. And one of the things that I've really taken from what I do in the NFL and also in reporting the book, so many stories that I was told from coaches and players about interactions they had with people who in the NFL who would say, well, I would hire you to be a coach, but if I hire you, you're going to hire all Black people, and what's left for my son and my son's friends, which is just so preposterous on its face, because it would be like when Obama became president, if he had hired all white people for his cabinet, there would have been such an uproar. No one does that, because even if there are Black CEOs, but no one hires all people who look like themselves when you're Black. Now, and we know historically.
I mean, that's what's the extra scrutiny?
Yeah. I mean, I went a little far afield here, but the bottom line is, for me, my life experience as a Black man shape everything that I do in my job, in writing books, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I actually think that's the most beautiful thing, that in the human experience, there are of course things that are universal, but each of us has our particular story, and that's what's beautiful, right? If we could recognize, and this sounds so kumbaya, but that, you know, there are so many things that I don't know, and when friends of mine who are different talk about their experience, that's a beautiful moment of understanding and shifting perspective. But to your point, we're in this space where it's a zero-sum game, and there's so much fear-mongering and this language of folks like us trying to take from other people that really is fueling so many of these detrimental policies that generations from now are going to still be reeling from.
Yeah, I'll say if I had to say probably what I was most concerned about, and maybe this is what I'll ask you in terms of where we're trying to go. I mean, we can't even have conversations now. We can't disagree, which is crazy. I don't know how you I don't know how you win when you can't disagree. We can't debate. And I would say that that's the thing I'm most concerned about as we're talking about what the next 150 years or whatever or so will be. When you look at where we are, what you know, based after you've written your books and you've learned so much about what has happened in terms of history, what most concerns you moving forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've a ton of concerns. And, you know, I think my biggest concern, which is, it's intersectional, but I think about the climate crisis, and I think about having a 3.5-year-old son, and the ways that the climate crisis disproportionately affects marginalized folks. And so we are certainly all going to feel the effects, but some of us are going to feel it more, and those of us who are feeling it more are not the ones who perpetrated all of the harm. So I think a lot about climate change. I think I'm perhaps naively optimistic because I do think about things like the shift in demographics in the United States, and that by 2050 demographics will shift, and there will be white people for the first time will be in the minority. And I don't think that will immediately lead to shifting of power and decision-making ability, but I am hopeful that there's a recognition that it's a numbers game, right? Like that in order for any kind of progress to happen, more of the population is going to have to be included in the decisions. I'll give an example with the national parks. National parks right now are visited by almost 90% of visitors are white. Mm-hmm. The national parks are desperate to figure out how do we get Black, Indigenous, other people of color to the parks, because if we don't start going, the parks will fall into disrepair, right? Who's going to be caring for these parks? So now these are, and of course in this country finances really make people move, but thinking about, well, we need to incentivize, we need to reach out to these communities that have been for so long ignored, because the future of this space depends on it, right? Yeah. So that's where I'm naively hopeful. I don't think that certainly people are going to have like a change of heart. I think that conditions are going to be such that it will be in all of our best intentions to
I think that's an interesting point. I think if we probably look through history, there was somewhere in the book where you said it wasn't profitable for the NFL, so they decided they needed to make some decisions. So you mentioned money, and I'm pretty sure you can speak more to it, but finances and those kinds of things seem to move in this economy, in this world.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said again. And, yeah, you know, what I said, one of the things that I synthesized in the book was that Black players and Black quarterbacks specifically finally became in vogue when green trumped black, meaning that the league's success financially became such where coaches and executives, they were going to get fired if they didn't win. Yeah. And these owners were making so much money. The NFL is a $20 billion revenue league. So it just became a point where there aren't enough good quarterbacks to go around. And if there are all of a sudden these black guys who can do this, well, we got to let them help us do this. You know, it's just like the thing about a politician. A politician's job, when it really comes down to it, is keep getting reelected. Well, a head coach's job is to keep getting head coaching contracts. So, you know, it's very simple on that standpoint. And, you know, I'm concerned about all the things she just mentioned. And one of the other things I'm concerned about is the death of objective fact. That you know, we can have disagreements if we can agree on the facts, not opinions, not things that we bring our life experiences like, well, no, I mean, you know, we know that, pi equals 3.14. We that's something
Correct.
we
That's
have
a fact.
that's a fact.
Can't change it.
And
Yeah.
and one of the things I've seen, especially from writing this book, and the anger that the invective that I got from a lot of people online about this, it's like, okay, well, I'm not saying something that's not true. These things did happen.
They happened.
They say, well, no, that didn't really happen. And there are a lot of people who want to believe that these things didn't happen. And not to get too political here, but we see some things that are happening with taking classes out of AP programs, taking books out of school, and it's not because the information is not factual. It's because certain people feel aggrieved that these things are being taught, and that's not. Like a democratic society, a pluralistic republic cannot function if there's a death of objective fact, and that's one of the biggest things that scares me.
Ooh. Okay, it's 5. I think we've got 5 minutes, and I was supposed to start questions at 10, so I'm so sorry, but that was good. That was good, wasn't it, y'all? Okay, yeah, okay. So we've got some time to take some questions from the audience. If you have one, we're going to ask you to stand, and there's a mic in the middle. And if you want to come and ask your questions, just go to that mic, please. That's some good stuff, y'all.
Hey, good evening. Jason, I've read your book. It's a must-read. Definitely. Alison, I'm in the process of reading your book because of my wife.
Yay. She's my fan, yes.
And both of these are phenomenal books. Run and get them. My question, Jason, black quarterbacks, that was a frontier that was broken, and now we have this glass ceiling with black coaches. And the recalcitrance and the stubbornness that white owners have to, basically just flaunt it, racism. What is the methodology that you see that this glass ceiling can be broken?
Man, we got 4 minutes left. That's that is a phenomenal question. Okay, and I when I go on panel discussions and when I talk to colleges and classes, I spend like an hour on this subject. So let me just say briefly that there's the NFL owners. They hire the head coaches. Like, there's a fallacy that general managers hire head coaches. No, NFL owners hire their head coaches. And NFL owners, they have the quarterbacks who are the face of the team. The other face of the team are coaches. Yeah. They're willing to have quarterbacks, by and large, because those guys on the field can immensely improve their bottom line. But coaches, you understand that a lot of these guys are in the same country clubs as the owners. They get country club memberships when they become, when they join teams. These owners take these coaches with them when they have business meetings. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to say, and again, I'm not doing a good job because I'm speeding through this, is that there is a lack of comfort with having with a quarterback. There is a employee, employer relationship. That exists with coaching, but not to the same degree. It's more of a, hey, you're one of us type of thing. And we're not really one of them. And again, I've oversimplified this. I've had some sweeping generalizations in this. So if you want to rap about this when we're done, just let me know, all right? All right.
Wow. Okay. Are there some other questions? We're down to 2 minutes. Okay, we have another question here.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much. I'm Sharon Carter Sheridan, and I'd like to know your opinion on the black athlete and how he relates to the society as far as being with the boys or promoting himself and promoting his brand. And I'm kind of referring to John Moran. I realize that's basketball and not football, but obviously it happens in the NFL as well.
You want to go with it, or?
I don't know who those people are.
Oh. Well, let me just say, so it's basketball. I'll talk a little basketball, but I think that the NBA actually has development programs for young people, but I do think that there is a lot of pressure on them to try to remain cool, because we got to think about this. These are like 20, 30 million, 19, 20-year-olds. They're not grown men, really. I mean, they make a lot of money, but they're not, they're not there yet, you know. And so I would say that I just think there's a lot of pressure for young black men to assimilate sometimes. And I think for Ja Morant specifically, he didn't grow up like that, but he gets a lot of street creds, and then there's social media, and people are like kind of buying into it. And I honestly think he's just going through some peer pressure and just trying to figure himself out. But it's a lot of pressure, and he's just got to figure it out. He's got to have a good team around him. And I think for young black athletes that do come into that kind of money, that kind of access, they just need to make sure that they're providing the kind of support so that they continue to grow, because he's got brands, like you said, and now he was one of the ones that they were considering to be a face of the industry, but now they're kind of like, whoa, you know, some of these behaviors are just not in line with where the league wants to go. So I just think just overall in general, as these young people are getting these opportunities, that there's just got to be support, and they have to have a good support team and somebody that can work with them as they're trying to develop their own personal brand and develop their voice, because they are developing their voice. When I was 18, 19-year-old, I was developing my voice. So that's my thought, and it's probably oversimplified, but.
I want to add one thing quickly, and again, I don't even know who that person is, but I do think about the pressure of respectability within industries, and as Black people, that there's this expectation that we're going to be palatable for white audiences, for middle-class people, and so I sometimes push back, like, of course, you know, you don't want anybody to do things that are harmful, but we have to think a lot about is it disrespect, or is it is it different? Is it just that we have this expectation of respectability, palatable, somebody who I could have around my kids, right? Like their job is to play sports. Their job is not to be a hero for your child. That might be a byproduct. But I think rethinking the limitations that we put, particularly on Black people, around how we're expected to act in white spaces.
Thank everyone so much. I want to thank our panelists and our moderator.